Okay, so thank you, Niranjan, for joining us on our podcast today for episode 3. My name is Kohinoor. I am a neuroscientist. Hi, nice to meet you. I basically do research on the neuroscience and psychology of art and aesthetics.
Oh.
So what that means is, how your brain and your mind is functioning when you're looking at a piece of art, or you're dancing, or you're engaging in theater, which I know is your background as well. So that's kind of my research interest, and we do a bunch of different things under the foundation. And one of them is this podcast, Native Narratives. And the reason for this podcast is to talk to people who integrate the arts and the sciences to create real world impact or to create different artistic productions. So for me, you are an excellent guest to have on this podcast today. So I'm really grateful for you to come join us, because you've worked with artificial intelligence and with theater. So I'd love for you to give us an introduction about yourself, tell us a little bit about your work, and then we can take it forward.
So thanks a lot for having me here. It's a very interesting concept. And the confluence of these two things is something that I have always liked to be at.
Right.
And it's great to see people who have the same interests. I'm Niranjan, first of all, Niranjan Pednekar. And I'm a scientist right now at Sony Research. Before this, I was a chief scientist at Tata Research.
Right.
And I have been working on applying AI to a variety of domains.
Okay.
One of them being media. And for the last 7-8 years, I have been working on application of AI, data science as such, to media, entertainment, that kind of domain.
Okay.
I wanted to bring these two together mainly because I do a lot of art outside my workspace.
Right.
And sometimes what happens is work is your hobby and hobby is your work.
Yeah.
And this, I just wanted to complete that circle. And that's why I floated an idea of having a research group in AI applications to media. And that's how we began around 7 years ago in my earlier organization.
Okay.
Here also we're doing something similar.
Right.
With respect to theater, I have been doing theater since 2010. And before that, I had done theater in school. I never was a part of any of the Firodia Karandak and Purushottam Karandak type of theater activities here in Pune.
Okay.
But I just picked it up late.
Right.
And my background as a scientist actually helped me in sort of reading more about these arts, understanding what is writing, understanding what is acting, direction, and so on, and forming my own views around it.
Right.
And experimenting with techniques, experimenting on my own hypothesis, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So that's what my journey has been.
That's so interesting. That is very interesting. But before you move on to the integration, I just wanted to ask you, what is it that you do in your work that you said you apply AI to media? So can you give an example for people to kind of understand what that looks like?
So I'll give an example from my previous organization, because now it's out there in publications. So for example, two people are talking, and let's assume that these people are not really people, but avatars or say artificial beings.
Right.
So when we can imagine that we would generate speech, we would generate emotional speech, and you have been given a script and you're talking, you're sort of saying that, and emotional speech is being generated.
Right.
Now I'm responding. I'm also an artificial agent. I need to respond with respect to the script given to me, but in a very natural way to how you spoke it.
Right.
And this principle we wanted to derive from theater. And there's one particular technique called the Meisner technique.
Okay.
And in which what happens is that essentially what my reaction is or what my behavior is it comes out of your behavior and vice versa. So for example, if my script is as simple as, "Hi, how are you?" You say, "Fine, thank you." I say, "How are you?" And then I say, "Good." That's all my script is. The script is going to remain the same.
Right.
And I say, hi, how are you?" And you say, "I'm fine, thank you. How about you?" "I'm good." If I say, "Hi, how are you?" So you say, "Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
Right.
How about you?" "Good." So you can see that
the
script being the same, the emotional responses are very different.
Right.
And I have to sort of base my response on your response.
Right.
So we wanted to bring that aspect here. So we learned from a bunch of conversations from TV serials and Friends, to be precise.
Nice.
And what we wanted to do is to emulate a character
Okay.
and generate this reaction as if that character would generate
Okay.
to the way you are saying things. So
Right.
it's like two artificial characters talking to each other, but in a very realistic conversational way.
Right.
So this is, for example, one of the
Right.
ideas that we had been working on.
Right.
There are other things that, for example, currently I'm working on next generation recommendation systems, and then you use things like large language models in that, and so on and so forth.
Right.
But that's there. But the problems on the fringe, which is the one which I mentioned,
Right.
or a problem such as there's this phenomenon called uncanny valley.
Yeah, we're doing research on that actually. So
Absolutely. So
that's
I shouldn't be telling you about it.
no, but
But-
please, for our listeners, you should explain.
As a human, I have experienced uncanny valley.
Right.
But not as a researcher. I mean, we have started doing that, but
Right.
I asked you to explain what uncanny valley is. so
Sure,
that-
I'd be happy to, because we just yesterday had a meeting about the uncanny valley, and we're working on a project basically that tests that in art. But I'll get to that. So for our listeners or viewers who don't know what the uncanny valley is, it's basically when let's say in the case of robotics, you have a robot that looks like a human. There is a hypothesis in social psychology or social cognition that the more someone is like you, the more you tend to like them, right? So if our interests match and if you're more like me, then we tend to like each other, we get along, we have a good rapport. With a robot, that works to a certain extent, right? So if the robot is showing some human-like features, then the robot starts liking you, and you start liking the robot more, you engage with the robot more, etc. The minute it crosses a threshold of becoming too human-like, right? So the machine kind of becomes absolutely too human-like, and you feel this eerie feeling increasing. You're like, okay, this is weird. It's a machine, but it's becoming human, and you have this
Creepy.
uncanny, creepy, eerie feeling about it. That's the uncanny valley. It's called the valley because your liking is increasing to a certain extent, and it dips like a valley would dip, and then eventually it'll go ahead. But the idea is basically the more human-like it starts becoming after a certain threshold, you suddenly start feeling very eerie and creepy about this agent that you're interacting with. Now, whether that's a robot or an avatar, or in our case, we do research on art, and whether that's art that's looking too human-like, but you know that it's machine-made. That's basically the uncanny
So
valley.
an example that would be Sophie the robot,
Right.
for example, Sophia, right? Sophia,
yeah.
the robot. Or if you have watched movies like Beowulf or Tintin, they seem very human-like,
Right.
but they're not human-like. And one other thing which I have read about it is that one possible explanation is that in an evolutionary sense, when you're looking at something which is human-like, but you don't see the signs of it being alive,
Correct.
you tend to treat it as a corpse
Right.
or a dead thing which you need to get away from.
Right.
And like a zombie, for example,
Correct.
which is not real, but
Right.
for example, a zombie.
Right.
So human-like but not alive is what that feeling is.
Right.
And that's why evolution probably wants us to get away from that, is one of the explanations that I...
Yeah, you're right, actually. So there's two possible explanations in the literature, and to use very psychological terms, they're called categorization perception, or category perception and perceptual mismatch. So category perception is basically you tend to look at things in categories.
Right.
So if you're human, I'm ascribing human categories to you, and you're human-like. But suddenly, if there's a robot in front of me, and then there's suddenly, it's looking all human, but the eyes are artificial. There's a category problem that happens. Like I'm ascribing non-human-like things to a human agent and human-like things to a non-human agent. So there's two different categories. And the perceptual mismatch is what is the eye example, actually. So if there is by perception, you see a human, and then suddenly you see very artificial looking eyes on it, or vice versa, right? By perception, you see a robot, you see very wide eyes on it or something. It's a perceptual mismatch. You don't expect that to go hand in hand. So those are two potential explanations. There's more in the literature, obviously, but that one kind of, those are the two that are driving this phenomenon and driving the eerie feeling.
So one thing that we wanted to do is you take the generated humans which are suffering from uncanny valley, but you had derived them from a human.
Okay.
So you have a human, you make the human do faces and stuff, and you generate an artificial human which is also doing similar faces and so on, and then you learn the difference.
Right.
And when you next time generate a human, you try to go back to this. So there are these new models called diffusion models. You know about them perhaps. So you want to go from here to here now, because you have learned how to go from here to here. You have data for this. You can also try to make it more human now.
Right.
And in doing so, you want to reach a stage where you're just over the uncanny valley, and then you're done.
Right.
So even if you're producing artificial humans, they still look real human-like. Of course, this is just face.
Right.
It's not just face. It's speech.
Yeah.
It's non-verbal cues. It's behavior.
Yeah. Gestures, body posture.
Body, and so on. So it's not an easy problem at all.
But and it's not just the stimulus that you see. So it's not just perception, right? Like it's not just visual or auditory cues. It's also what the viewer believes.
Right.
If I know that the movement I'm seeing comes from a robot, then I'm going to have very different connotations in my head, and preconceived beliefs about, what that feels to me. Whereas if I know it's coming from a human, right? So even your preconceived beliefs, like we call them stimulus and knowledge cues again in very scientific terms, but very simply put, what you see is one thing. What you believe is also incredibly important. So if you believe that what you're seeing is like a human agent, or what you're seeing is a computer agent, then obviously your notions about that are going to completely change.
Right. So there was an experiment some time ago, 4 years ago.
Right.
There's a model called CGAN, which is called Creative GAN.
Right.
And what it tried doing is it tried coming up with paintings which were different than, original paintings, so to say.
Right.
So they looked different than what existed.
Right.
So when people were given these paintings, they really liked them. When they were told that they were generated by an algorithm, they sort of didn't like them that much.
Yeah, that's exactly.
It's a bias, and it's one of the questions in AI ethics.
Right.
Eventually, when or if we have people around us or entities or which are artificial, how will the discrimination be?
Right.
How much will people discriminate
based
on the fact that they're not really humans?
Yeah.
So that's one of the ethical questions.
100%. And I think we'll go to the ethics of AI, I guess, at some point in this conversation, because that's one of the questions, but there's so many other ethical issues that people talk about. They're all over in media. People have a very dystopian attitude also, or like view of how AI can create a dystopian world and stuff like that, right? But we'll get to that. I want to circle back to the work that you were doing, right? Like with two agents interacting and how you used it in media. But I want to also ask you how that changed your perspective about theater. So I know you said you came to theater a little bit later. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you came to it, and then how you actually just decided one day, got up and said, hey, let me see how data looks like in theater. Like, how was that journey for you?
I used to do a lot of theater in school. I didn't do any theater in between.
Right.
And at one point, there was an inter-corporate competition. And I took part in that, and I was a part of the music crew. So singing songs and so on.
Right.
But that whole thing, it won the first prize in that year's competition. And because of that, I thought, this is a good thing to do. Though I have not done this before, it looks like a good thing to do. And then I said that, where did you get the script from? I asked the director. He said that we borrowed it from COEP. So I said, you borrowed it from COEP kids who had just probably completed their this thing. I said, yes. So why don't we write our own script? So next year, I said, I'll write a script. So next year, I just wrote a script. When the time came, I thought of what was resonating in my mind at that time. And there are a couple of deaths in near family owing to cancer. And people were sort of like, they didn't talk about it and so on. So I said, can I write something about cancer where people keep on laughing the whole time, but it's still about cancer? So I said, can I think of an idea like that? So an idea came to me that there are these two worlds. One world is inside the stomach, and these are cells. And there's another world where a doctor is talking to a patient's wife, and she's worried that he's not well. And so he says that you do these kind of tests. We'll see, like nothing to worry about. Doesn't look like that, but let's just do this test.
Right.
And parallelly, here there is a cell, and he has a love interest, and which is an insulin cell called Godu, and their names are Potya and Tondu and Pesha and so on. So that kind of stuff. There is a fat cell called Charbikar who talks in very heavy language. So that's the fat that we're talking about, and so on. So there's a world setup, and this happens, and suddenly one fine day, the protagonist Pesha, he comes and he finds no cells there, but only this Charbikar, and he finds out that there is this guy who has abducted all the cells, and he has left sort of a notice there saying that you have to come with me and be like me, because the world changes, the world mutates. So come with me and change. And I'm your Kankya Raja, is what he says. And on this side, suddenly you see that a doctor is telling the patient's wife that your husband has a gastric adenocarcinoma of the intestine. And then she's worried. And then what happens in this whole thing?
Right.
So
So
because
interesting.
yeah.
It's also a little bit like science communication, actually.
So it was a fun play. Everyone enjoyed it, and we won the first prize.
Nice.
Next year, I wrote something. I sort of started liking what I was doing, and then I wrote something about words. And there are these words which are conjunctions, and there is a human couple, and this guy says at one point that I like every word that comes out of your mouth. And these guys take objection, saying that how come conjunctions, like, they are treated like every words? Because conjunctions they have to hold two sentences together, so they are bigger and better than others. So we have to, like, they have something like Akhil Marathi Vakya Jod Shabda Vikas Sangatana, something like that.
Okay.
And they sort of are also holding their election.
Right.
So as a challenge, they set up like whichever word has the most influence over this guy wins the election. And then there are these words like Manun and Kimwa and Zartar and so on.
Right.
And all of them, I also thought of giving them, because it's Marathi, giving them a regional personality in Marathi.
Right.
So Manun Karanwar is from Vidarbha.
Right.
Then Pan Shankapure is from Pune, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So give that kind of a this thing, and that also won award. So at that point, I thought that I can write, but then because of my profession, one thing to do is to see what other people have done. And when you see that, and when you see the method to the madness, so to say, that is when you realize that you're nowhere yet. And it's a typical humbling journey that happens in science also.
Right.
That you look at other people's work as humbly as you can, and then you try to sort of synthesize it, think on top of it, like standing on the shoulders of giants, that kind of stuff. And then you get new ideas, then you can synthesize that work in an abstraction that makes everything sort of fall in place for you, and so on. So that time I started thinking more sort of clearly about what these arts were.
Right.
And I thought of doing experimentation with whatever I could find. Say, for example, an acting technique. For example, this Meisner kind of technique. So what would it give me? So I thought of writing a play for that, which had a lot of conversation, and then putting this in place and directing that play myself outside, all by myself. Just self-produce it, maybe run a few shows, that's it. Maybe 5 shows is what I began with. And that's how the journey started. That I picked up a few people who were interested in doing these kind of things. Few people from college also who wanted to do a little bit of adult plays. Right. And that's how we came together, and different sorts of people, different types of actors and so on. And I could experiment a lot with them. And they were there because we were not paying. It's prayogik Rangabhumi, so you don't pay anyone, and you don't get anything. You lose money. While doing so, I wanted to make sure that people get something out of it. Right. So there's something to take away. Right. And most of the people who have come through that they still swear by that. I learned this here, and I got to experiment with this here, and so on. So it's been a good experience for them. Right. And the same is the case with me. Right. But then it started to mature a bit. I realized one thing, that whatever I could write, people have written better than that. So you can't compare yourself to a Nobel Prize winner that easily. And then you might say that kabhi to ho jayega kuch to kuch. I mean, there's something there which you may not have. Right. And therefore, I thought that things which I really like, which I really resonate with, can I bring them to this language? And where do I have to take rights in some cases? which people are out of copyright, so that I can
Right.
blindly just do anything I want
Right.
to do, etc. So I adapted from stories, 3 Kafka stories
Nice.
actually, into plays, and one of them was selected at Bharat Rang Mahotsav in NSD, and that is where people then started knowing that
Right.
I'm doing some sort of
Can I
work
ask
and-
which Kafka plays which Kafka stories?
Sure, sure. So Metamorphosis.
Nice. Yeah. I was wondering if it was that one. Yeah.
So it's called Eka Udyachi Goshta.
Okay.
And Metamorphosis starts with the metamorphosis. The first line is metamorphosis. So what I did is that I let that line come in the middle,
Okay.
and I showed what the life was before that,
Right.
and then after that.
Right.
So as a contrast,
Yeah.
and that comes bang in the middle.
Okay.
The first sentence,
Right.
Gregor Samsa waking up.
Yeah, waking up.
So of course I brought it here in a Marathi Indian context,
Got it.
and so that was that.
Mhm.
Then a hunger artist, Upasha. The third one was in the penal colony, Machine. So all these 3, I really enjoyed the process, and
Nice.
you have this feeling of contribution in sciences.
Yeah.
That when you're say writing a new paper, you need to
Correct.
show what your contribution is.
Right.
But even more than that, when you're starting with a new idea, you have to understand what are you adding to the field. Is there anything new? If sometimes there is nothing new, and you still want to do it because
it's a replication or
it's a
something.
replication, or you want to go ahead, reach a particular stage,
Correct.
and then try out other things and so on. But most of the times you would like novelty to be added,
Correct.
some sort of contribution. So I always thought of contribution while doing plays, while doing adaptations. What have I contributed to Kafka's story?
Right.
What have I taken out of it? What have I given it? So sometimes taking away something is a problem. Say, for example, Kafka's stories are stark.
Yeah.
And the starkness really works while I'm reading it.
Yeah, but not as much when you're watching it.
When you're watching it, will the starkness work? It might, but can you make it much more playful?
Right.
And still it leaves you with some sort of void. I could do that with Upasha, and with Upasha, a hunger artist. The basic idea is that artist thinks that hunger is his art.
Right.
He can go hungry forever. And he says that people should come and watch this because this is such a big art. I am sort of conquering my hunger, which is such a big art. So they should just be sitting there and watching me starve. And I can do that infinitely. But the manager that this guy has says, no. You need some like packages.
Right.
You need a 40-day package wherein you start. 40th day, you will have a big fanfare and do a big show there, and you sort of eat a banana or something.
Right.
And that's where you end your fast. And then we go to the next place and do the same thing again, and so on. So this guy is inherently opposed to this kind of a
marketing gimmick.
Yeah. Or making a business out of it.
Right.
And that's why they have sort of a row, and they part ways. And eventually, the artist is found, the hunger artist is found in a circus, in a cage. And while people are moving around it, they are doing wah, 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 wah to everything. So it's like and one question that he asks, that there's a monkey sitting next to me who farts. There is a lady in the next cage who's doing all sorts of vulgar things. And there is a python who keeps on sleeping. And I am here. Everyone gets the same wah. So how do we quantify this wah?
Yeah.
Is the question that he has.
That's
so,
the question in empirical and neuroaesthetics. How do you quantify the reaction that the audience has?
Right.
Yeah.
So you have wah,
Right.
and you have 100,000 likes.
Right.
What does each like mean?
Right.
It's probably just a function of a person just noticing your thing for 0.2 seconds and doing that like and moving ahead because it's you. Or someone is actually looking at it for some time and so on. So
every like will also have a different route that leads to that liking.
Absolutely.
Right. So even in empirical aesthetics, we have we construct models to figure out what is the liking, like what's the constitution of the liking. Right. So to give you a very simple example, if I'm Indian and I'm looking at Western art, or broadly speaking Western art, let's say American art, I'm going to look at it from a piece of from a perspective of a tourist maybe, or like a different culture experience for me.
Right.
Whereas if I'm looking at Indian art, there's going to be some semblance of cultural identity that I
Right.
feel, right?
Right.
But in both cases, I might like the painting the same way,
Right.
or to the same
Right.
degree. If you ask me, quantify
Mhm.
and say out of 5 how much I like it, one painting could be 4 on 5, the other could be 4 on 5 as well. But my reason for liking it are very, very different.
Right.
So what
Right.
constitutes the liking actually is completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. And the context also
Matters. Yeah, absolutely.
After the Ram Mandir inauguration, someone who is watching Taj Mahal, who was very happy with the Ram Mandir inauguration, is probably not going to feel much by looking at the designs on Taj Mahal. So that's also there. Obviously.
Yeah, 100%. The context plays a really, really big role. Yeah. It's so interesting because everything that you're talking about actually has parallels in the literature and in the work that we do. So we did work on how context influences your perception of art, for example. Like if you give certain kinds of information and you will withhold certain information, or even when we talk about AI art, like you said, the study a few years ago, we did the same thing with dance. So we showed people dance videos and we said some of the videos, like we made them believe some of them were AI generated and we made them believe some of them were not, like some of them were human generated. And obviously you see that people have a bias, right? So they'll rate like videos they think are generated by humans way higher than the videos they believe are computer generated or AI generated, even though the videos are basically the same. But just because you put this context and you put a framing to it, people are going to change their views.
Right.
Yeah, but from all the examples that you've just given me of the plays, I feel like there is so much of a scientific angle to every single play that you've kind of constructed, right? And there's a lot of science communication. So the one on cancer, for example, the message is always like, there is something that you get out of it that's also kind of science being made palatable for the audience. But how did you come to using AI in particular, or this is the science is your kind of way of understanding a concept, breaking it down, what's your contribution, so it's your way of thinking. So how do you integrate AI into theatre is an interesting question.
Rather than AI, I would say science, because I don't really distinguish in the two. And you said science earlier.
Yes.
And there was a play called The Shakespeare Experiment, where I had used the infinite monkey theorem, which is if monkeys sit and type infinitely on a keyboard, they might just by random chance generate a meaningful sentences from a Shakespeare play. So that's called infinite monkey theorem. And there was a 10-minute short sort of skit which a writer called David Eves had done, and I really liked that, and I thought that it could have been made into a bigger play. So there the question between science and like how people get lost in science and sort of not pay attention to simpler needs of communication and so on. It talked about that through monkeys and so on. So the science was always there. Even in Upasha, I had done a swarm. I wanted to do swarm formations.
Swarming behaviors? Like
swarm
evolutionary? Behavior? Oh, okay. Very cool.
So what happens in a swarm behavior is that individual, say, entities in a swarm, say organisms in a swarm, let's say a swarm of birds, they go by certain very basic rules. Say, for example, I'll keep enough distance from the other organisms near me. That's one rule. The other rule is I'll try to move to the center. And the third rule is if I'm sort of out, I'll try to come inside. So that those are the general rules. And what I told the actors is that you can only do these three rules. Don't think of anything else. I just want you to adhere to these three rules. And let's just now move around in the whole thing. And we changed these rules a bit based on the organisms that we were trying to look at. So a swarm of birds, swarm of say flies, of ants, and so on. And the rules become slightly different. And for ants, for example, there is pheromone. So people are dropping sort of white powder and doing that. And wherever there is more powder, after some time, they'll do that. That kind of stuff we tried through people, so that all they think of is just the simple rules and nothing else. Can swarm behavior originate out of that? And then we used it in Upasha because we wanted to show how audiences are like sheep. And we use this sheep flock swarm behavior there. So that way I was interested in doing that, because for me, it's not really science. It's like a part of the discourse. It's like one of the truths that's around me, and I've been working a lot on truthful acting in general, wherein the actor believes in something. It can be anything. It can be a real circumstance with respect to the character, or it can be something as imaginary as I have two piercing rods coming out of my eyes, and I'm piercing anyone who is coming in front of me with those rods. So this is something that I believe in, and I just have that, and I'm just doing that all the time. It's not real, but I fully believe it, that it's there with me. And even if I am a realistic character, I also had these imaginary circumstances added to me, and this resides inside and allows me to truthfully act, because I truly believe that this is happening. So when things like that happen, one of the truths that you find were these scientific facts. So swarm behavior was one such thing. So that way, it was just a part of the storytelling for me. AI as such, the part of AI, what we call AI, came through what formations of concepts we have in scripts. So you might know about word clouds.
Yes.
So word clouds are essentially, say, arrangement of words, wherein the most frequently happening or occurring words in a piece of text, they appear bigger, and the others appear smaller. As the frequency reduces, the words appear smaller and smaller. If I look at the word clouds of a script, what does it give me? And of course, you filter out the most common words like am, I, the, etc. They're called stop words, by the way, in natural language processing. And those you filter out, and the word clouds that you get are very revealing at times.
Absolutely.
A particular play could be talking about certain things, and then the next step is how are these different for different scenes. So what is each scene talking about really is also something that I get. If I take these words now, and if I take the most important words in the whole play, how are they related to each other? So there is something called semantic similarity. How is a word, say for example, guard and night, are words slightly similar to each other. Night and sky are words similar to each other. Sky and bird are similar to each other. They have some semantic similarity, as in similarity in meaning, in terms of meaning. They're not synonyms, but they have similar contexts.
They're associated.
So high degree of association. So if you find out what are the clusters of high degree of association, you get concepts in the play, sort of. Now, what happens is that good playwrights place something to sort of connect these two clusters. So there is one cluster about guards. There's another cluster about night. They might just put night guards and the guards which are guarding in the night. And that's how they are trying to put these two together. Hands and sword and etc. is one cluster. Sword is connected to guards again, and so on. So that way you have associations with this. This in art could be called rapt. Rapt is relatedness. So rapt is, I think, a Persian word, which is for relatedness. And high degree of relatedness, there is a theory by a guy called Jürgen Schmidt-Huber, who says that if you can take information and can express it in smaller number of bits, you have achieved some amount of creativity. It's a measure of creativity. So rapt is a measure of creativity in that sense. So to see the world in a grain of sand, that kind of stuff. You're putting together things and relating them, and you're sort of making things concise by taking these concepts out. Now, if the script has certain concepts unrelated, they're still unrelated, I as a director can relate them further. So for example, if surveillance and say guards and something like surveillance, I want to put them together, I can put CCTVs. If I want to put surveillance and air, sky together, or birds, I can put a drone,
Right.
and so on. So I get certain decisions by further connecting these dots.
Okay.
So that's one of the functions of a director, is
Right.
to connect the dots.
Right.
And one way in which it could be done was this.
Right.
So I did a lot of experiments while, especially I was doing Shahi Peredar. Just before that, I did a lot of experiments with this, that the word clouds, experiments with script, the connectedness of concepts. I also did one thing wherein what is happening typically is that they say that within 3 to 6 minutes, if nothing spectacular happens, no new information is added, no new gap of knowledge is created, no new visual get created, your attention might drop.
Right.
So I was just wondering, is it also contained in the script, the words? And then you look at the words. The words have, like you know about the two, must know about the two axes, actually three, but two axes, arousal and valence,
Yes.
where arousal is the intensity and
Yes.
valence is the polarity of an emotion.
Correct.
So arousal, high arousal words, can I pick these high intensity words,
Right.
which are likely to be, say for example, I went from point A to point B versus I darted from point A to
Correct.
point B. So darted has more intensity.
More intensity.
Are these there in the script itself? And if they are in the script, how do I,
Right.
I mean, do they cause an intensity rise?
Right.
So what I tried doing is that there is a function which is making, which the viewer is losing all the
Right.
time.
Right.
Because attention is a resource that will deplete all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it starts depleting, and these words are sort of propping it up
Right.
at different places.
Right.
So I built a model like that to create a sort of a intensity profile of this whole thing.
Okay.
And there I could see which parts are low intensity or which parts are sort of not intense enough. I actually went back. I did that for a few scripts. And I went back and looked at those parts. They indeed had lull
Right.
of sorts. So I need to do something as a director there.
Right.
I
Right. So
can't-
did you work on it ad hoc, or was it always like afterwards? Like, did you work on it a priori, or was it always after? that
So
you've
in
done?
some cases, some of the experiments I did later.
Okay.
Some of the experiments I did before.
Okay.
So for example, this experiment, the intensity I did later
Right.
because I wanted to find whether there's a problem with what I was doing.
Right.
And I went later and I saw that there is a chance that the script itself is indicating that there is a problem here.
Right.
And it was precisely pointing to those places. So I also looked at other scripts.
Right.
I had already done these graphs on my own,
Right.
just by thinking about it
Right.
for certain other scripts.
Okay.
I just put it into an algorithm and used the script as a basis for that.
Got it.
And I could find similar behavior. And I could locate those places. So I think it's a useful tool. You can't just rely only on that, but
Of
it's a
course.
useful tool.
Right.
And that's how I started using. So this was around 2018.
Okay.
So in general, I was using stuff before that, but
Right.
since 2018, I started using more of it.
How has that changed your direction? Like, to what extent has it changed? Has it changed it completely, or do you still rely on, let's say, a lot of the talk of artists using science or using AI is also centering around intuition. So do you rely on your intuition now, or do you go back to this kind of data, what the data shows you, and then say, okay, no, I need to make these changes? So how has your creative process changed?
So for me, it's an experiment. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, I don't pay much attention to it.
Right.
That happens. Generally, it gives me useful information
Right.
that I can work with. It sometimes cuts down on some of the work that I need to do as a director. In direction, how is direction different than, say, acting? So an actor has to play a role which may not be that actor himself or herself. It's very different than my being, but I still have to play that role.
Right.
They don't have a choice. A director has a choice, essentially. The choices that a director makes are typically reflective of what that person is. So the process is also reflective of what that person is. And that's why when I'm using these kind of things, they also reflect on what I am.
Right.
And I like getting that data.
Okay.
It's not that I'll rely on the data and I will leave my intuition. Because intuition and choices is probably very, very important for a director. And it's a very personal thing
Right.
that way. And if you're able to come up with many choices for a given situation, for a given depiction, you're likely to do well in direction in general. And you being able to cut down upon choices that you have already with you. That's the other thing.
Right.
So plenty and then constraints is what you want to do with direction. So sometimes for the plenty, you can use something like this.
Right.
Sometimes for the constraints, you can do something like this. And now with the advent of LLMs, what happens is that you just converse with it as if you are just talking to your assistant director.
Yeah.
And assistant directors typically, they have been given like words such as like abhi, like arrange food for people, etc. But that's not the definition I'm referring to.
Right.
Definition that I'm referring to is that someone who helps the director in directing the play. And that's how I have assistant directors. So sometimes ChatGPT or an LLM forms a good assistant director, is what I've seen. That you can ask for ideas sometimes. You can bounce off ideas.
Right.
You can get alternatives. For me, it's not necessary because I get a lot of ideas by myself in general. But for actors, sometimes it's necessary to, I found that it's very beneficial for actors to make choices early on and try them out.
Okay.
Actors have a problem, as in they are the most vulnerable of the lot. The director can just sneak away while a play is going on. It was not good, the director can just go. The actor cannot escape.
Right.
The actor will have to bear her soul in front of people, in rehearsals, in front of everyone.
Right.
So a very vulnerable species. And they think that there is a lot of responsibility upon them in general. So to make things easier for them is what I have always tried doing as a director. One of the things is this. Say, for example, just give the script and ask what could be the adjectives for this person. What are the 3 major adjectives that you ascribe to this person? And ChatGPT can give you really good adjectives. It can justify it also. It's a bol bachan.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it will do that. And they're actually useful. And now you tell it, nee, all this is good. These seem to be the normal adjectives. Give me something that is wacky. That is less apparent.
Right.
And then the choices that you get are very, very good.
Right.
Those kind of choices, if actors do by themselves, they get a lot of help from that, is what I've seen. So ChatGPT also I have been using quite frequently with plays.
Right.
Not to generate plays, because that's a different thing. I would like to sit and write a play.
Right.
But to sit and do, analyze a script and to make choices can be burdensome for actors especially. And they go in a lot of directions. To constrain them is one of the things that can be done very effectively using AI.